Are you feeling agitated that you have to do synthetic division? Is the agitation increased when you see an imaginary number? Well, guess what? This video is going to help solve all your problems. Let's take a look at this example. We have x squared plus 1, and that's then being divided now by x plus I, where I represents an imaginary number and is generally defined as the square root of -1. You cannot take the square root of a negative number, because remember, a square root is basically when you take the square root of a number, you're asking yourself what value multiplied by itself will give me the value inside of this square root. No number multiplied by itself will give you a negative result. Okay, they're always going to be positive. And therefore, that's why it's an imaginary thing. It doesn't kind of exist. It's kind of made up. Don't you love it in like math, right? They just make stuff up, right? It almost feels like it's totally made up. Obviously, there's real applications to this, but it's just like, oh, it's an imaginary number and it doesn't exist, but we're going to do some math with it. It actually does have implications, but it's kind of funny, right? In no other, imagine taking a physics class and, yeah, it's imaginary. The ball, it's not really there. It's just imagined to be there. What? Well, actually, if you start doing quantum mechanics, that actually does become kind of true. So I guess it does really apply. Anyway, getting back to business. How do we do this? How do we do this problem? What do we do? What are we doing? Where am I? Right. Synthetic division. Now, whenever you have to do synthetic division, there's a very, very simple series of steps you're going to follow. First, locate your dividend, or aka the numerator, and locate the highest power of x. Add 1 to it, and what that's going to do, for a total of 3 here, it's going to tell you the amount of columns you're going to need, the number of columns you're going to need inside of your synthetic division table. Take a look. Bam. So as you can see, we have 3 columns here inside of the synthetic division table. Now what's going to go in the first column is going to be the coefficient of your x squared term. What goes in the second column is the x term. What goes in the last column is going to be your constant. And whatever the highest power of x is, you're just going to simply work your way on down all the way to the constant. So if this was like x to the 15th, then it would be x to the 14th, and then 14th, and then the 13th, and the 12th, etc. All the way down to the x, and then eventually the constant, okay? So now when you look back at this, you're going to locate your coefficient of your x squared term. It is a 1, so that's great. Boom. Then you're going to look back and you're going to say, oh, what's the coefficient of the x term? I don't even see it. Well, guess what? That's going to be the easiest one to identify, a 0. So if you don't see an x term, or any term for that matter, you're going to make the coefficient 0. Then you have your constant term of plus 1, so just plug in a positive 1 there. Great. We're done with the dividend. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the denominator, in other words, the divisor, and we're going to set that baby equal to 0. And the reason why you're going to do this is because you're going to solve this for x, and whatever that value is, in this case it's going to be -I, that's going to tell you the value you're going to need to plug into the outside of your synthetic division table. Now once you have this row fully filled out, you can just begin the simple series of steps, all right, to calculate. So take this first coefficient, drop it all the way down. This box is going to be red, and that means nothing's going to go in it. Take that value at the bottom, 1, multiply it by the value on the outside, -I. So that should total -I. Then what you're going to do is you're going to add this column together. 0 plus -I is obviously -I. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take -I, multiply it by -I, and that will work out to be a positive I squared. Then what you're going to do is add this column together, okay, and it's going to be 1 plus now I squared. Cool. Now what you have to do, keep in mind what you solve for down here. This will represent your remainder, okay, a part of the remainder. This will represent your constant term, and this will represent your x term, and then if you had more, it would be x squared, x cubed, etc., etc. Okay? What you have to do, though, before you start writing out your quotient, is you got to go back to your divisor, locate the x, and identify the coefficient of it. In this case, it's a 1. So it won't really do anything, but I need to teach it to you. So what you're going to do is every single term here, except the remainder, don't divide it into the remainder, you'd be dividing by that coefficient. Okay? Obviously, it's 1, so it doesn't really do anything in this problem. But if it changes now, you won't be lost. Okay? If this were, let's say, a 4, then this would have been 1/4, and that would have been the new value there. It wouldn't be 1, it would be 1/4. All right. So backtracking a little bit. Let's now simply write out the answer, okay? So it's going to be 1x minus I, not IC, because that represents a constant term, okay? And then it's going to be plus now. This thing, 1 plus I squared, 1 plus I squared, all being divided now by whatever your divisor is. So x plus I. Okay? Now what you're going to do before you kind of, settle on this answer and give it as the final value, you just want to simplify where necessary. So you don't need the 1 here. That doesn't do anything. And the one value you have to investigate a little further is I squared. Because if I is defined as square root of -1, well then I squared should be the result of taking that square root of -1 and squaring it. When you square a square root, it gets rid of it. So in other words, I squared is going to be equal to -1, right? So where you have I squared here now, you're not going to write I squared anymore because it is a true value. You're going to write now a -1. And what is 1 plus -1? It is indeed 0. And what's 0 divided by anything? I don't care if it's made up. It doesn't matter. It's always going to be 0. So this whole term just goes bye-bye. And guess what? This is now your quotient. In other words, when you take this dividend, divide it by that divisor, you get this quotient. Thanks for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. If this video helped out at all, if you don't mind, just maybe mentioning our channel to some of your classmates. We'd love to help them with problems as well. And also, we have more videos for you, not only in math. We have thousands of videos out there. Math, physics, chemistry. All right, if you're taking one of those subjects, I think you'll find our channel very, very helpful because we solve specific examples. Thanks for tuning in.